Our story begins with a man consumed by a singular obsession to stand at the absolute pinnacle of martial arts. Yet reality proved cruel. No matter how many years he dedicated to training, no matter how much blood and sweat he poured into his craft, the summit remained just beyond his grasp. He simply lacked the natural talent to reach the heights he desperately craved. But obsession has a way of drowning out reason. Instead of accepting his limitations, he turned to legend, chasing whispers of an ancient myth about a divine dragon that guarded a mystical golden fruit, rumored to bestow immortality upon those brave enough to consume it. After a brutal confrontation with the divine dragon guardian, he finally stood before the sacred tree. There it was, the legendary fruit bathed in radiant golden light, pulsing with an otherworldly aura that seemed to bend reality itself. Exhausted and bloodied, he collapsed atop the dragon's massive corpse, his gaze locked on the glowing prize. After regaining his strength, he rose to his feet and approached the tree with trembling hands. This was it. This fruit would grant him everything he'd sacrificed for. Without a moment's hesitation, he plucked the golden fruit and bit into it. Immediately, an explosive energy tore through his body, his veins igniting like wildfire as his very essence was reforged by divine power. This man was Gilfus Eldragon, renowned as the strongest warrior humanity had ever known. But even legends must face their twilight. Decades later, Gilfus lay frail and weak in his bed, surrounded by his descendants. His children and grandchildren whispered among themselves that his final moments were approaching. His eldest son clasped his father's weathered hand tightly, struggling to maintain composure. Gilfus, still the head of the Eldragon family, told them he wanted no tears, that his time had simply arrived. His son replied with a forced smile, voice breaking that the manor had already grown unbearably lonely after their mother's passing, and would feel even emptier without their father. But Gilfus urged him not to surrender to despair. As silence blanketed the room, Gilfus reflected on the golden fruit. Perhaps the old myths were never meant to be believed. Still, he felt grateful for the long life he'd lived and the family he'd built. He assured his loved ones that he had no regrets. But it was a lie. Even now, on death's doorstep, he couldn't release his dream. If only he had more time, he would continue chasing that unreachable peak. With that unfulfilled desire burning in his heart, Gilfus Eldragon took his final breath. Then the impossible happened. His eyes opened once more. Confusion flooded his mind. Was this merely sleep? Everything felt wrong. The room looked different. His body felt unnaturally light. When he finally examined his hands, shock paralyzed him. These tiny hands weren't his. He was an infant. As someone who had reached the 10th star of martial mastery, he couldn't comprehend how this transformation could occur without his awareness. Then understanding struck like lightning. The divine dragon. The golden fruit. The fruit hadn't granted immortality, but reincarnation. Though unexpected, excitement surged through him. He'd been given another chance. A second life to achieve what had eluded him before. Observing his surroundings, he realized he was in the annex of the Eldragon Manor. Somehow, he'd been reborn into his own bloodline. The room was filled with other newborns. Before he could process why so many infants were gathered here, a group of attendants entered carrying feeding bottles. But something was wrong. Instead of milk, the bottles contained a crimson liquid. Gilfus watched as they poured the strange substance into the bottles. Suddenly they grabbed a goblin and forced the bottle into its mouth. Within seconds, the creature convulsed violently. A scarlet light erupted from its body before it exploded in a horrific spray of blood. Terror gripped Gilfus. What kind of ritual was this? One attendant calmly noted that they needed to adjust the water ratio to make the mixture safe. As they began feeding the red liquid to the other infants, an attendant picked up Gilfus. He instantly recognized the overwhelming energy emanating from the bottle. This was dragon blood, and it was far too potent for a newborn's fragile body to withstand. Before he could resist, the bottle was pressed to his lips. Instinct took over and he began drinking. Immediately, devastating power flooded his tiny body. Agony ripped through every nerve, but Gilfus recognized this force, ancient dragon blood coursing through his veins. This was incredibly dangerous, yet also an unprecedented opportunity. If he could absorb this power, he might surpass even his previous peak. He might finally reach the true summit. With iron determination, he continued drinking despite the excruciating pain. His veins bulged grotesquely, his body convulsing, but his will remained unshakable. "I am Gilfus Eldragon," he repeated internally, enduring until miraculously, he survived. The attendant stared in disbelief as he continued drinking what should have been lethal. Inside his infant body, two massive dragon energies clashed in a violent struggle for dominance. When one finally consumed the other, Gilfus marveled at how his body had absorbed the power. As the two dragon forces merged completely within him, he realized this was the perfect foundation for his second life. After draining the last drop, he couldn't believe he'd survived the overwhelming torment. His body hadn't ruptured. Instead, it had adapted and grown stronger. He noticed a few other infants had also survived the ordeal, which amused him slightly. Never underestimate a newborn's will to survive, but even triumph couldn't overcome the limitations of an infant's body. Exhaustion crashed over him like a wave, and despite his incredible achievement, Gilfus Eldragon, the strongest warrior ever reborn, surrendered to sleep. 7 years passed in rigorous discipline. Now a young boy, he executed one-handed push-ups with a massive boulder balanced on his feet. When he completed his 1,000th repetition, he kicked the boulder skyward and let it crash down onto his back. The impact would have shattered an ordinary child's spine, yet he barely felt it. Gilfus Eldragon, former head of the Eldragon clan, now lived under a new identity, Sieg Eldragon, though most called him Zeke. He marveled at the physical power he'd cultivated at such a young age, attributing it entirely to the ancient dragon blood coursing through his veins. In this world, every living being possessed what was known as a source of power. The ancient dragon blood they'd consumed as infants contained an extraordinary concentration of that power. Those who survived drinking it developed bodies vastly superior to ordinary humans. With the divine dragon source power within him, Zeke had already surpassed the physical limits he'd reached at the same age in his previous life. Since he was the only infant who'd managed to consume an entire bottle of ancient dragon blood, his body underwent a transformation beyond even his expectations. Yet frustration gnawed at him. Despite his progress, he remained stuck at 1 star. He'd trained relentlessly, expecting to reach at least 4 stars by now. Stars measured one's source power in this world. The human body was believed to resemble a universe, and the more stars floating within that inner cosmos, the stronger the individual became. However, ascending to higher star levels grew exponentially more difficult with each advancement. In his past life as Gilfus Eldragon, Zeke had achieved an unprecedented 10 stars, a feat no one else in history had ever accomplished. Time truly flies, Zeke thought. He was now 7 years old. He'd learned he was an illegitimate child of the current Eldragon family head. His mother had died when he was still an infant, and to this day, he'd never even laid eyes on his father, something he considered profoundly irresponsible. What shocked him most was discovering that 1,000 years had elapsed since his death and rebirth. Reincarnation itself seemed impossible, yet here he was a millennium later. The world had transformed dramatically. It had become an era where only the strongest survived. The most glaring evidence was the practice of feeding infants ancient dragon blood, followed by a brutal ritual known as the dragon trial. Only those who survived both the blood consumption and the dragon trial earned the right to receive education and training as Eldragon warriors. Naturally, Zeke should have been among them. Yet whenever he questioned the servant assigned to care for him about why no instructor had been sent, would only reply that he wasn't permitted to answer. Even after turning 7, Zeke had never received a single formal lesson. Isn't that strange? Zeke wondered aloud. Every child who survived the dragon trial was supposed to begin combat training. Everyone except him. Day after day he lived in isolation with only a servant for company, When he confronted the man about this treatment, the servant simply asked what was wrong with the arrangement. Zeke sighed, acknowledging that for now, physical conditioning mattered more than formal combat instruction. After all, he could teach himself if necessary. He'd once been a 10-star warrior. He then requested information about the other surviving infants or anything about the main family, but once again, the servant refused, claiming he wasn't authorized to disclose such details. Frustration darkened Zeke's expression. "Will you always refuse to answer me?" he asked sharply. The servant bowed his head, repeating that he couldn't discuss such matters. "Isn't it cruel," Zeke asked bitterly, "treating me like this?" But the servant explained he was merely following orders. His duty was to attend to Zeke's daily needs, nothing more. The servant, a 3-star level practitioner, could have easily taught Zeke basic combat techniques, yet Zeke had no interest in such elementary lessons. After 7 years of living with this man, he'd grown accustomed to the same hollow responses. Finally, Zeke decided to leave and head into the forest. The servant said nothing, merely watching as Zeke walked away. So he's really just going to let me go, Zeke thought with mild irritation. Deep in the forest, Zeke uprooted wild, poisonous herbs and consumed them without hesitation. The taste was revolting, but this was part of his training regimen. Suddenly he sensed something. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "Be patient," he repeated internally. He could feel someone or something observing him from a distance, tracking his every movement. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the presence. After several moments, Zeke sighed. "They followed me all the way here," he muttered. When he could no longer tolerate the surveillance, he called out, "You might as well come out if you've got something to say." Then he moved into the tall grass, concealing himself. Moments later, while crouched in the vegetation, Zeke detected a dark, oppressive aura nearby. When he looked toward the source, he saw a creature known as an anger boar. What is that aura, he wondered. The black mist surrounding the beast was something he'd never encountered before, not even 1,000 years ago. As the anger boar grazed peacefully, Zeke suddenly stood and revealed himself, startling the creature. It charged immediately, and rather than fear, a smile crossed Zeke's face. He was genuinely thrilled to fight it. The boar lunged forward, but Zeke swiftly dodged, gathering golden energy into his fist. With a devastating strike, he unleashed an explosion that tore through the anger boar's body. He couldn't help but grin at the result. His attack had been far more powerful than expected. Even as a 1-star practitioner, his strength surpassed most at the same level. Hoisting the slain creature over his shoulder, Zeke muttered, "It'll be even better once I raise my star level." He was exhausted. 7 years of being ignored and isolated by the Eldragon family had worn him down. He wondered if it was time to leave and travel independently, perhaps even venture toward the ocean and explore what this new world had to offer. Meanwhile, in the distance, a cloaked figure observed from the shadows. "What's going on with that boy?" he muttered to himself. "Without any formal training, he's already reached 1-star level, and he killed that anger boar with a single strike." What puzzled the observer even more was how Zeke had managed to detect his presence. "That child isn't ordinary," he said quietly. He recalled that Zeke's mother had died young, and his father, the current family, had shown absolutely no interest in the boy. Without proper guidance or mentorship, the child shouldn't have developed this level of strength. Still, as the son of the Eldragon head, illegitimate or not, Zeke was bound to remain under the clan's surveillance. That was precisely why someone of his caliber had been assigned to monitor the boy from the shadows. An illegitimate son, yet the blood of the family head runs through his veins, the man whispered. Could that be the source of his strength? Uncertain but intrigued, he chuckled softly. That kid will be fascinating to watch in the future. Then he vanished into the darkness. Back at Zeke's residence, the boy was packing his belongings, preparing to embark on his journey. But suddenly, he sensed several powerful presences approaching. 3 4-star practitioners and 1 5-star. What are they doing here? He thought, moving quietly to the door to eavesdrop. From their conversation, he heard them commenting on how fresh and clean the air was in such a remote location, and how peaceful it felt since there were no nearby rifts. Hearing this, Zeke concluded they weren't assassins. They didn't sound hostile at all. Deciding to confront them directly, he opened his door and asked what business they had there. The group froze in surprise. Then Zeke noticed the emblem embroidered on their clothing, the mark of the L-Dragon clan. L-Dragon, he muttered under his breath, wondering what they wanted from him. The men quickly bowed respectfully. "It's an honor to finally meet you, young Master Zeke," their leader said. "We've been sent to escort you to the site of your examination." Examination? Zeke frowned in confusion. Annoyance flickered across his face. "They expect me to take an exam," he muttered, "even though they haven't taught me a damn thing." Several days later, Zeke could hardly believe he'd returned to the main estate of the L-Dragon family. He wasn't brought here to live within the main estate again, but rather for another purpose entirely. Before he could enter, they instructed him to change out of his travel-worn clothes first. As he prepared, Zeke learned about something known as the Dragon's Nest. After 1,000 years, the L-Dragon family had established an academy that served all branches of their bloodline. Everyone born with any connection to the L-Dragon family dreamed of entering this prestigious dragon's nest to receive proper education once they turned 7 years old. Today marked the entrance ceremony for that academy. Zeke was here to participate in the entrance examination. Even though he'd learned nothing about the modern generation of his family, taking the exam was mandatory. Zeke immediately felt disheartened when he realized this was the true reason they'd brought him here. Why now, he thought, when I'd already decided to leave and explore the world? While sitting by the academy gate, a boy from Orscale village approached him. It was Rangus, who asked if he was all right and what seemed to be troubling him. When Zeke asked who he was, the boy formally introduced himself as Rangus and explained he'd approached because Zeke looked distressed. "Is that so?" Zeke replied casually. After observing the flow of energy within Rangus's body, Zeke quietly noted that the boy seemed shy but possessed an unusually strong sense of perception. Zeke then apologized for his demeanor, introducing himself in return, and admitting his mind was in chaos because he had no idea what the exam would entail. "Is that all?" Rangus said, feeling slightly nervous at the mention of the test. Still, he explained that the annual entrance examination for the Dragon's Nest didn't really change much from year to year. But when Zeke admitted he knew absolutely nothing about the exam, Rangus was shocked. Taking the test without any knowledge. Wasn't that far too reckless and dangerous? Just as Rangus was about to explain the exam details, a loud and arrogant voice suddenly interrupted them. A boastful boy shouted, calling Rangus a weakling. Rangus turned around in shock and immediately recognized the speaker. It was Ritan, also from Orscale village. Mocking him cruelly, Ritan asked why he was here, suggesting he must have gotten lost to end up at the Dragon's Nest. He even told him it would be better to go home before he got hurt. "I'm here to take the entrance exam," Rangus replied, though his voice trembled as Ritan drew closer, asking if he was seriously going to take the test. Ritan clutched his stomach and burst out laughing, declaring it was impossible for Rangus to pass. He even insulted Rangus's father, sneering, "Your father's a pseudo-dragon, right? What could the son of a pseudo-dragon possibly accomplish?" Rangus's fists trembled as he fought to contain his anger, but Zeke noticed everything. The L-Dragon family followed an absolute hierarchy, it was explained. The ranks were as follows: novice whelp dragons at entry level, regular soldier child dragons, captain level adult dragons, executive elder dragons, also known as elders, at the leadership tier, and at the very bottom were the pseudo-dragons. These were individuals who had failed to enter or graduate from the Dragon's Nest, considered immature and incomplete dragons. Yet Rangus had long dreamed of proving that even if they were called pseudo-dragons, they were still dragons nonetheless. Zeke was intrigued and asked why Ritan was so certain Rangus would fail the exam before it even started. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Ritan snapped, asking if Zeke had a problem with him. Zeke calmly replied he was merely curious why Ritan was so confident Rangus couldn't pass. Ritan pointed at Rangus and shouted that the reason was obvious. He was just a weakling. Zeke tilted his head thoughtfully and asked if he really believed Rangus was weak, because from what he could sense, Rangus seemed even stronger than Ritan and his companions. Hearing that declaration, Rangus's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the first time anyone had ever stood up for him. The arrogant boys grew furious, demanding to know if Zeke was seriously claiming they were weaker than a pseudo-dragon, a rank they considered utterly inferior. But before the confrontation could escalate further, a commanding presence arrived and drew everyone's attention. He was an adult dragon examiner, announcing that the Dragon's Nest entrance examination was about to commence, and that all participants should register to receive their identification numbers. As Ritan departed, he glared venomously at Zeke and warned that he wouldn't forget his face. Zeke sighed, remarking there was no need for such hostility. The children of this generation seemed to possess remarkably short tempers. Rangus quickly replied that it wasn't strange since they were all about the same age. He added that anyone would be angry if told they were weaker than a pseudo-dragon's son. Is that so? Zeke muttered lightly. Since the entrance examination was mandatory, they had no choice but to participate. Zeke was surprised when Rangus mentioned it was actually possible to withdraw from the test. Zeke's eyes widened, and Rangus realized he truly knew nothing about the process. Rangus advised that it might be wiser to withdraw now, before getting seriously injured, but Zeke replied confidently that a genius like himself would never back down from a challenge. Rangus could only shake his head, saying Zeke was dangerously overconfident despite his complete ignorance about the examination. Zeke simply laughed, suggesting they hurry since the test was about to begin. Rangus had no choice but to agree. When they arrived at the testing grounds, the examiner announced the exam was straightforward. To pass, participants only needed to scratch the stones placed behind him. However, no personal weapons were permitted, only those provided by the academy. Participants were free to use their bare hands if they wished, but each candidate had only 3 attempts. That's it, Zeke said, sounding distinctly unimpressed. After surviving the dragon trial as infants, he'd expected something far more terrifying and intense. This seemed disappointingly simple. The examiner then called the first participant and instructed him to begin. The boy, nervous but determined, struck the massive stone with all his strength. The sound of metal clashing against rock echoed loudly, ringing in everyone's ears. But to the crowd's shock, the boy's sword snapped cleanly in half, and the violent recoil shattered his arm. Zeke was stunned by what he witnessed. As the boy writhed in agony, the examiner calmly stated he still had 2 remaining attempts and asked if he wished to continue. But since the boy could no longer stand, the examiner declared him failed and ordered assistants to clear the area. As the injured participant was dragged away, the next number was called. Rangus trembled in fear at what he'd just witnessed, while Zeke grew increasingly annoyed. "So this is what they call an examination," he muttered. He then questioned what kind of stones possessed such properties. The stones had regenerative capabilities, meaning any scratches would vanish instantly. Moreover, they could reflect physical force back at the attacker 100-fold when struck with power. Zeke immediately declared such materials were far too excessive for an entrance exam, but Rangus explained it was still possible to scratch them if one could properly circulate their source power throughout their entire body before attacking. "I see," Zeke said. He realized that source power circulation was far more critical than martial arts technique in this examination. After observing the other participants, he thought only a handful would pass, including those arrogant boys from earlier. As the exam continued, more candidates failed than succeeded. Many sustained severe injuries due to the stone's ability to reflect ordinary physical attacks. Then, after several moments, the examiner called out Zeke's number. "It's my turn," Zeke said with a calm smile. Rangus, still visibly nervous, asked if he truly had no intention of withdrawing, but Zeke simply walked forward, telling him not to worry. As he approached the examiner, the man's eyes widened in shock. Zeke's aura began to surge, faintly revealing the overwhelming might from his previous life as Gilfaz. The examiner instructed him to step forward and select a weapon, but Zeke declined. His fists alone would suffice. The crowd murmured in disbelief. No matter how skilled he might be at circulating source power, they thought there was absolutely no way he could scratch the stone with bare hands. His fists would surely shatter instead. Some spectators declared that not only Zeke's fists but also his arms would be obliterated, which made Rangus extremely anxious for him. Along with his fear came anger toward himself, thinking he should have forcibly stopped Zeke from attempting something so reckless. The examiner gave the signal to begin. As Zeke approached the massive stone, he placed his hand on its surface, noting this was the first time he'd encountered such a material. It must have been developed over the 1,000 years since his death. Even now, there were countless things about the current era he didn't fully understand, but that no longer mattered. He immediately gathered his source power into his fist. While Rangus trembled with anxiety about Zeke's fate, the protagonist himself was filled with exhilaration. For the first time since his rebirth, he could unleash his full strength. He decided to use this mysterious stone to measure his current power level. Rangus's eyes widened once more as Zeke unleashed the first form of the Dragon Destruction combat technique, Burst Strike. A tremendous surge of energy erupted from the impact, Fragments of shattered rock flew in every direction, and the violent shockwave sent dust and debris swirling through the air. In awe yet defensive, Rangus quickly shielded himself from the devastating aftermath, while the examiner's eyes widened in absolute disbelief at what he'd just witnessed. As the dust began to settle, Zeke stood there with a satisfied smile, remarking that the technique he'd used still seemed too powerful for his current physical condition. Despite the severe injuries covering his hand, he laughed at himself, realizing he still required far more intensive training. The other participants stood speechless at what they'd seen. Rayton looked both shocked and irritated that Zeke had completely destroyed the enchanted stone. A woman observing from the sidelines commented that Zeke was truly fascinating. While the others still couldn't process what had transpired, Zeke waited happily for the examiner to announce the results. But the examiner remained frozen in shock. The stone Zeke had obliterated was designed to regenerate itself, and only practitioners who had already reached 4-star level or higher were supposed to possess the capability to break it. Yet now, a mere child stood before him, having accomplished what seemed absolutely impossible. "He's just an illegitimate son," the examiner muttered to himself, then wondered if Zeke's extraordinary ability stemmed from the blood of the family head that still flowed through his veins. The examiner also realized that the technique Zeke had used seemed strangely familiar, as if he'd witnessed it somewhere before. Still dazed by the display of power, the examiner didn't respond immediately. Zeke called out impatiently, demanding to know the result. Snapping back to his senses, the examiner finally declared that Zeke had passed the examination. One of the assistants then handed Zeke a small bottle containing a green liquid. Curious, Zeke asked what it was, but the man only asked if he could move along since he was blocking the testing area. Annoyed, Zeke frowned and muttered whether everyone in this generation was this rude. Before he could complain further, Rangus ran up to him with unbridled excitement, praising Zeke's incredible performance. Zeke grinned proudly and declared it was nothing extraordinary. He then inquired about the mysterious liquid, and Rangus explained it was a healing potion, the standard medicinal preparation of the Eldragon family. "Healing potion," Zeke repeated with interest. Rangus confirmed it. Since Zeke was an illegitimate son of the family, he initially suspected it might be poison. However, since Rangus had vouched for its authenticity, he wondered if it might actually be a rare spiritual medicine. The elixir was crafted from extraordinarily rare materials, herbs found only in hidden secret realms, combined with the pure source power of divine beasts and the essence of elusive phantom creatures. When consumed, it could heal not only fresh wounds but also old scars and lingering injuries. Additionally, it could enhance one's source power reserves. Because the ingredients were so scarce and the refinement process so complex, such elixirs were rarely encountered in the world. After drinking it, Zeke was genuinely amazed by its immediate effect on his body. "Is this really a spiritual medicine?" he asked Rangus. Rangus replied that he didn't understand what spiritual medicine meant, but he was certain the Eldragon family's potions were of far superior quality than any commercial products available outside their domain. Rangus then asked if the potion's effect surprised Zeke that much. Of course, Zeke explained, noting it had healed both his serious injuries and the accumulated strain from his training. However, he observed that unlike true spiritual medicine, it didn't appear to significantly boost his source power. Rangus countered that he was even more amazed by Zeke himself, to which Zeke chuckled and told him not to joke around. Zeke reflected internally that the potion's existence demonstrated how far knowledge and refinement techniques had advanced over the past 1,000 years. Rangus praised Zeke's strength once more, and Zeke boldly declared that his ultimate dream was to become the absolute strongest of all. Soon, the examiner announced that Rayton had also passed the test, along with his companions. Zeke expected as much from their skill level, but then Rangus trembled nervously when his number was called. Despite his obvious fear, he gathered his courage and walked to the front. Watching his stiff, anxious movements, Zeke wondered why Rangus was so nervous, then shouted encouragement, telling him to trust in himself. Embarrassed, Rangus asked him to lower his voice. When Rangus selected a sword as his weapon, Zeke watched closely, puzzled by the choice. Once the examiner gave the signal, Rangus attacked the stone, but as expected, he failed on his first attempt. Determined, he stood again for another try, but his strike bounced violently off the stone's surface, causing him to lose balance and fall. His hands trembled from the stone's devastating reflective ability. Rayton and his group burst into cruel laughter, declaring it was exactly as they'd predicted. The son of a pseudo-dragon was nothing more than a pseudo-dragon himself. They mocked him mercilessly, telling him to give up. Rayton even sneered at Zeke, asking sarcastically if this was the same person he'd claimed could pass, and whether Rangus was truly stronger than them. Zeke remained silent for a moment, then told them firmly to stop spouting nonsense. The examiner informed Rangus that he only had one attempt remaining and asked if he still wished to continue. Rangus couldn't answer immediately, overwhelmed by embarrassment and the relentless ridicule of the crowd. He lowered his head in defeat, but then Zeke walked up to him and asked what he was doing. He questioned why Rangus was using a sword instead of a spear, why he would select a weapon that didn't suit his natural abilities, and why he would take such an important test without any coherent strategy. Ritan watched mockingly as Zeke told Rangus that in his current condition, he wouldn't scratch the stone no matter how many attempts he made. Ritan and his group laughed again, calling Zeke an idiot and reminding him that Rangus knew absolutely nothing about spear techniques. His weak father had only ever taught him basic swordsmanship, they jeered, and switching weapons now wouldn't change the inevitable outcome. But Zeke ignored their taunts completely and called out to the examiner, asking if it was against the rules to change weapons. The examiner confirmed it wasn't prohibited. Then Rangus is fortunate, Zeke said with a confident grin. He turned to Rangus and asked directly if he trusted him. Memories of all the humiliation he and his father had endured over the years flashed through Rangus's mind. Gritting his teeth, he stood tall and declared he would trust Zeke completely. He would fight with a spear exactly as Zeke instructed. Rangus reflected that his father had never managed to enter the dragon's nest. Because of that failure, people called him a pseudo-dragon and ridiculed him constantly. But despite all the humiliation and scorn, his father had endured everything just to raise Rangus properly with love and dedication. That's why Rangus swore to prove to everyone that he, Rangus, the son raised with such care by his father, was also a true dragon worthy of respect. He stood up once more, gripping the spear tightly in both hands, and declared that today he would prove neither he nor his father were inferior or fake dragons. He also recognized that if he attempted the test again with a sword, the result would only replicate his previous failures. So this time, he decided to place his complete trust in Zeke. The only problem was his total lack of spear training. Zeke called out to him, and as he pointed toward the enchanted stone, he instructed Rangus that there was nothing complicated he needed to do. Just thrust the spear straight into the stone without overthinking anything. Just pierce it straight through, Zeke commanded firmly. Rangus tightened his grip on the spear's shaft. He understood that under normal circumstances, stabbing the stone directly wouldn't cause even the slightest scratch, especially since it possessed such powerful regenerative properties. But Zeke was the very first person to ever stand up for him, defend him publicly, even though they had only met earlier that same day. It was something completely new and unfamiliar to him. But because of that unprecedented kindness, he chose to place his absolute faith in Zeke and believe in his own hidden strength. This time, he gathered his source power into the spear itself and immediately noticed something extraordinary. For years, he had wielded a sword diligently, yet he had never managed to wrap it in this much concentrated source energy, something he was now accomplishing effortlessly with the spear. With a determined battle cry, Rangus unleashed his full power and struck the stone with everything he possessed. Ritan nearly collapsed laughing, declaring it was exactly what he'd predicted. Changing weapons wouldn't magically help him pass the examination, but Rangus didn't stop his attack. He felt something fundamentally different this time, something genuinely powerful coursing through him. The spear in his hands felt like a natural extension of his own body. Then, as he drove the weapon forward with every ounce of strength he possessed, the spear pierced completely through the enchanted stone. The shock on Ritan's face and those of his companions was absolutely priceless. Even the examiners couldn't conceal their astonishment, delighted by what they'd just witnessed. Rangus hadn't merely scratched the stone's surface, he had driven straight through it entirely. Zeke immediately praised him enthusiastically, while Rangus himself could hardly believe what he'd accomplished. Even after the examiner officially declared that he had passed, Rangus still asked in disbelief whether he'd truly succeeded. Zeke smiled warmly, wrapped an arm around his shoulder and confirmed it absolutely. Overwhelmed with pure joy, Rangus nearly cried as he embraced Zeke tightly, shouting repeatedly that he'd done it, that he'd actually passed the examination. Ritan's group, however, refused to accept the reality before them. They dismissed it as pure luck, though Ritan himself remained silent, trembling with barely contained rage. He couldn't accept that, exactly as Zeke had predicted, Rangus was genuinely stronger than them, and that his result was far superior. The examiner then announced that the testing phase had officially concluded. Afterward, he declared the entrance ceremony would commence shortly. Zeke immediately questioned whether the examination was truly finished. Rangus confirmed it appeared so, but added there would likely be additional evaluations once they entered the dragon's nest itself. Soon, a group of imposing figures emerged from a darkened hallway. When they stepped into the light, the examiner announced that the head of the Eldragon family would now deliver a speech to congratulate those who had passed. The moment Zeke saw the man, He asked who the person with the cold, intimidating expression was. Rangus, visibly nervous, replied that it was the family head himself. "That's the family head," Zeke said incredulously. "Why does he look like that? He's not even smiling. He looks colder than ice." Rangus immediately covered Zeke's mouth, whispering urgently that it would be wisest if he remained quiet, repeating his desperate plea for silence. Zeke reluctantly nodded. When he examined the assembled group again, he observed that these individuals represented the current power structure of the Eldragon family. Some had reached 7-star level, while others were 6-star practitioners. To Zeke, their collective strength was genuinely impressive, especially since the current family head, Balsa Eldragon, was an 8-star level powerhouse. 1,000 years ago, only a handful of people had ever achieved that remarkable level. Still, Zeke wasn't certain how many such warriors existed in this current era. "I don't like this family head," Zeke muttered under his breath. But before he could elaborate further, Rangus frantically tried to silence him again. Zeke sighed internally, thinking he never expected this intimidating man to be his father in this lifetime. A dark, fiery aura radiated menacingly from Balsa's body, making the entire atmosphere feel oppressively heavy. The examiner quickly ordered everyone to maintain absolute silence because Master Balsa was about to address them. When Balsa stepped forward, he uttered only a few terse words. They must all strive to become the flesh and blood of the Eldragon family. As he spoke, the terrifying pressure of his aura spread throughout the hall like a suffocating blanket. Zeke remained completely unaffected, but many examinees trembled in genuine fear, some struggling to breathe as their bodies froze under the immense spiritual pressure. Zeke noticed that even Rangus was visibly affected. He couldn't believe how easily everyone around him was overwhelmed by the family head's mere presence. More than that, Zeke could sense an intense, deeply rooted hatred concealed within Balsa's aura. He didn't understand the reason behind such darkness, but even so, he couldn't bring himself to like the man who was supposedly his biological father. When Balsa turned away dismissively, another man stepped forward and immediately drew everyone's attention. He had striking blonde hair and cheerfully thanked Balsa for his brief words. He then explained that Master Balsa held high expectations for them all, and that just like his master, he would also keep his own speech mercifully short. As Zeke wondered who this more approachable man was, the speaker simply instructed everyone to train diligently and grow progressively stronger. "That's it," one of the examiners muttered in surprise. The blonde man smiled warmly and joked that people who worried excessively about trivial matters went bald prematurely, so he wouldn't burden them with lengthy speeches. Zeke couldn't understand what was fundamentally wrong with this family's leadership, but at least the oppressive atmosphere in the hall had lightened considerably. The examiner then announced that new students would now be assigned to their dormitories. Everyone whose number was called must proceed there immediately. Zeke asked whether they wouldn't all be staying in the same dormitory, and Rangus explained there were 4 separate halls: East, West, South, and North. Every student accepted into the academy was permitted to reside in one of those 4 residential halls. When Zeke's number was called, he stood up and waved goodbye to Rangus casually. He was assigned to the East Hall. As he walked through the winding corridors, he commented that much had transformed in this place over the past millennium. After finally locating his designated room, he acknowledged he must have gotten lost since it had taken him considerable time to arrive, and his roommate had probably arrived first. When he opened the door, he cheerfully greeted his new roommate and apologized for his tardiness. He explained that from today onward they'd be sharing the same living space, but to his genuine surprise and delight, his new roommate turned out to be none other than Rangus himself. Zeke couldn't help but laugh heartily, declaring it seemed like fate kept deliberately linking them together. He asked if there was anything else scheduled for the remainder of the day, and Rangus confirmed their formal training would commence tomorrow morning. "Is that so?" Zeke said casually, prompting Rangus to question whether he hadn't listened to the examiner's earlier detailed explanation. Zeke admitted frankly that he hadn't paid attention on purpose. Rangus sighed wearily and suggested they should rest early since intensive training would begin the following day. As Zeke gazed contemplatively out the window at the night sky, he reflected on his original plan to escape from the Eldragon family and explore the world independently. But after what he'd discovered about the enchanted stone with its remarkable regenerative properties and the sophisticated healing potions, he realized he'd encountered many fascinating developments during the examination. If he genuinely wanted to comprehend all the dramatic changes that had occurred over the past 1,000 years, he reasoned, then perhaps remaining with the Eldragon family temporarily wouldn't be such an unfavorable decision after all. A full month passed at the academy, and their training regimen continued to grow increasingly demanding. Holding massive dumbbells in both hands during an exhausting exercise, the instructor explained that the dragon's breath technique he was teaching them represented one of the most crucial methods ever created by the 15th Eldragon family head. After reminding them sternly that they had to master the technique under any environmental condition, the instructor's sharp attention was drawn to a few struggling students who required additional correction. Some students, the instructor noticed, had already mastered Dragon's Breath remarkably well, especially the young woman he addressed as Master Leica. Her overflowing energy suggested she was approaching 2-star level rapidly. But aside from her exceptional progress, one other student caught his attention completely, and he could hardly believe what he was witnessing. Zeke was training while not only gripping the heavy dumbbells, but also balancing massive stones on his head and arms simultaneously. The instructor stared in absolute disbelief and muttered to himself that the blood of the family head truly ran powerfully in Zeke's veins. However, it was well known that no one had ever formally taught Zeke anything since childhood, which made everything he was observing now feel profoundly unfamiliar and unprecedented. Zeke, on the other hand, couldn't believe that the technique he'd once called the Dragon King's breathing technique had been further refined and developed by successive family heads, and that it was now being taught to other branches of the family as standard curriculum. According to Zeke's understanding, breathing techniques were specialized methods that gathered source power from the surrounding environment into the practitioner's body. Once properly circulated, this external source power would significantly strengthen a person's internal energy reserves. The effectiveness of such techniques depended entirely on an individual's natural ability and intellectual comprehension. That was precisely why the great families of this world kept their techniques strictly confidential, never permitting them to be learned by outsiders or those not belonging to their direct bloodline. Zeke also realized the current Dragon's Breath was a safe and relatively simple technique, accessible enough to master, but it was functionally useless to him since it could only be utilized while stationary and resting. His own original version of the breathing technique allowed him to actively manipulate surrounding source power, even while moving and fighting. Because of that fundamental difference, it was exponentially more complex and devastatingly powerful in actual combat scenarios, but also monumentally harder to master. Only a select few warriors had ever successfully learned it in his previous lifetime. He deduced the current generation must have deliberately simplified his original version so that even the family's branch members could learn and benefit from it. And that pragmatic decision had clearly contributed to strengthening the Eldragon family substantially over the centuries. Zeke couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction and pride. He never imagined the techniques he'd painstakingly discovered long ago would still generate meaningful impact after 1,000 years. It made him wonder curiously whether the other martial arts techniques he'd created had also evolved and adapted over such an extended time span. Interesting, he muttered to himself, genuinely amused by the thought. Leica, meanwhile, quietly observed Zeke from a calculated distance, her analytical gaze never wavering. Later in the cafeteria, other students were utterly astonished by the sheer quantity of food Zeke was consuming. As he continued devouring his substantial meal, he noticed Rangus sitting silently and pensively across from him. "What's wrong?" Zeke asked between bites. "You won't develop strength if you don't eat properly." Rangus simply questioned whether Zeke didn't find his own stamina and appetite peculiar. "That's simple," Zeke replied matter-of-factly. "You just need to consume more food if you want to grow stronger, train harder, push yourself beyond your limits." He even generously offered some of his abundant food to Rangus, but the latter politely declined, insisting he'd had sufficient portions. As Zeke contemplated how some students had clearly received extensive training even before entering the academy, a confident female voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. "You're quite impressive," Leica declared, her tone calm, yet radiating confidence. Zeke blinked in mild confusion. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked casually, genuinely curious. Rangus immediately choked on his food, whispering nervously in panic. "You don't know who she is." "Why, that's Master Leica, the daughter of the family head Lord Balsa himself." "Oh," Zeke said with complete indifference. "What do you want me to do about that?" "I don't know her." Rangus began sweating profusely, practically pleading. "You can't speak like that so disrespectfully. Master Leica is one of the official candidates to become the next family head. She's not someone you can address so casually." "Is that so?" Zeke replied dismissively. "Well, I'm a family head's child too. An illegitimate one, though." Rangus froze in absolute shock while Leica regarded him with renewed curiosity. "Is that actually true?" she asked with genuine interest. You're really the family head's illegitimate son. Like a Typhon Eldragon, one of the primary candidates to inherit leadership of the Eldragon family, was now standing directly before Zeke with undivided attention. Why would I fabricate something like that? Zeke said with a casual shrug. Laika frowned slightly, her analytical mind working. Then explain to me how an illegitimate child like you managed to completely destroy the enchanted examination stone with your bare hands. How could someone not raised in a renowned household possess such extraordinary strength? Because I'm Zeke, he replied with absolute confidence, turning his attention back to Rangus. Stop staring awkwardly and finish your meal. Both Laika and Rangus fell into momentary silence, processing his straightforward answer. Then Laika suddenly smiled with genuine intrigue. You really are a fascinating person, she declared before sitting down boldly beside him uninvited. How about serving under me directly? I'll make you one of my primary followers and supporters. Zeke raised an eyebrow skeptically. What exactly do you mean by that arrangement? I want you to join my faction, she explained clearly. Become my ally, and I'll serve as your political backer. Every illegitimate child needs strategic allies and influence to survive, don't they? I'd use your remarkable strength to help me become the next family head, and once I achieve that position, I'll help you accomplish your own personal dreams and ambitions. Zeke didn't even hesitate for a second. No, he stated flatly without elaboration. Laika frowned again, clearly unaccustomed to such direct rejection. Why refuse? Don't tell me you harbor ambitions to become the family head yourself. As her aura flared noticeably with faint crackling lightning energy, Zeke could accurately assess that she was extremely close to achieving 2-star level. For someone her relatively young age to manifest an aura of that intensity and quality, she was undeniably impressive and talented. Still, Zeke remained completely calm and unmoved. You can think and pursue whatever goals you want, he said evenly, but I have absolutely no interest in becoming family head or holding any kind of political title whatsoever. Why not? Laika asked coldly, her patience wearing thin. Zeke stabbed his dining knife firmly into the wooden table surface for emphasis. Because I don't need to serve anyone, he said, his voice steady, but carrying an edge of undeniable authority. I'm the strongest person there is. The entire cafeteria went dead silent at his declaration. Even Laika couldn't fully believe what she was sensing. Zeke's overwhelming presence had completely dominated her perception for that brief moment, making her acutely aware of the vast gulf between them. Rangus immediately stepped in diplomatically to diffuse the mounting tension, urgently pleading with both of them to calm down and reconsider. But Laika wasn't the personality type to back down from challenges, especially when embarrassed and angered by what had just transpired. She decided immediately to challenge Zeke to a formal duel to settle the matter. Zeke, however, didn't seem remotely concerned and simply continued eating his meal with complete focus. Moments later, excited commotion spread rapidly across the entire campus. Where is everyone rushing to? One student asked breathlessly. To the training grounds, another replied urgently. There's going to be a formal duel between members of the younger generation. Master Laika herself is fighting personally. What? Ours Master Laika from the prestigious Typhon family, someone exclaimed in disbelief. Who's possibly brave or foolish enough to challenge her directly? When the growing crowd arrived at the designated training grounds, everyone whispered feverishly among themselves, speculating intensely about who would dare face her in combat. Zeke, meanwhile, couldn't quite believe Laika was genuinely serious about conducting this duel. Are you completely all right with this decision? Rangus asked with extreme nervousness. You'll be fighting Master Laika directly in front of witnesses. Even if you address her as Master, I genuinely don't know who she is beyond a name, Zeke replied with brutal bluntness. Rangus sighed deeply in exasperation. You should at least demonstrate some basic respect now that I know you're also the family head's biological son. Do whatever you want, Zeke said dismissively. Still, Rangus felt compelled to explain the gravity of the situation. What's critically important right now is that you fully understand who you're actually challenging. Master Laika isn't just anyone in this family. She's the legitimate daughter of Lord Balsa Eldragon himself, and she also carries the distinguished blood of the Typhon family, one of the 4 great noble families that actively support the Eldragon clan politically and militarily. She's a recognized prodigy who mastered all fundamental forms of the Typhon family's hereditary lightning greatsword technique at an extraordinarily young age. Like her father's other legitimate children, she possesses terrifying natural talent. Zeke tilted his head in confusion. I didn't understand a single word of that explanation except that she's the family head's daughter. Rangus stared at him in disbelief. How do you not know any of this basic information? Because I don't, Zeke stated plainly. So don't interrogate me about it. Rangus blinked as Zeke suddenly laughed with genuine amusement. But since I don't know anything about her background, he said with an enthusiastic grin, that'll just make the fight significantly more entertaining. Sounds genuinely exciting to me. Rangus could only sigh deeply in mounting worry and concern. No matter how physically strong Zeke had proven himself, Master Leica operated on another level entirely in terms of technique and formal training. Why did you even accept her challenge in the first place? He asked desperately. I never run from a fight, Zeke answered with absolute conviction, and it appears my challenger is ready anyway. At that precise moment, Leica stood with her imposing greatsword planted firmly in the ground, her aura flaring visibly with faint lightning crackling around her form. Are you two finally done with your conversation? She asked with icy composure. Leica shouted impatiently, asking if they were finished talking, and Zeke confirmed he was completely ready. Rangus, trembling in fear and anticipation, immediately retreated from the combat zone, urgently warning Zeke to exercise extreme caution in their fight. Zeke then turned his full attention to Leica and questioned why she was so intensely determined to fight him specifically. Leica explained clearly that she wanted to become the next family head of the Eldragon family. To achieve that monumental goal, she needed to defeat Zeke decisively and recruit him as one of her loyal followers. What do you mean by that connection? Zeke asked, genuinely puzzled about what relationship his strength had to her ambition of becoming family head. Leica questioned him in return, asking if he truly possessed no awareness about the current political situation within their family, and whether being an illegitimate child was the primary reason he remained so profoundly unaware of family dynamics. Zeke simply answered that he didn't, frankly admitting his knowledge about their family structure was severely limited. Because of that honest admission, Leica began explaining the complex situation methodically. She revealed that including both of them, there were 5 official candidates competing to become the next family head. Except for Zeke, all of her siblings maintained strategic connections to the 4 major branch families of the Eldragon clan. The prestigious position of family head carried such immense importance that it had become a primary source of intense conflict among those powerful branches. For that reason, all of Zeke's siblings had entered the Dragon's Nest Academy to study formally and represent their respective family factions politically. Since the succession fight had evolved into a fierce and often ruthless competition, Leica needed exceptionally strong allies to effectively stand against her more established older brothers, who already commanded significant resources. Zeke quickly understood this represented a complex power struggle between the 4 main branches of the Eldragon family. He found the entire political situation far too convoluted, and wasn't even certain if he wanted to comprehend it fully. Leica then continued her explanation, stating that as one of the legitimate candidates for family head, she needed to systematically strengthen not only her personal knowledge and combat power, but also her political influence, by strategically gathering strong and loyal followers to her cause. Without another word of warning, she charged straight toward Zeke with devastating speed, declaring she would defeat him decisively right then, to make him one of her subordinates. But Zeke effortlessly dodged her powerful opening strike, as well as the impressive flurry of subsequent attacks that followed in rapid succession. Still, Leica refused to allow him any escape routes, pressing her assault relentlessly. The gathered onlookers couldn't believe what they were witnessing unfold. The sheer speed of their movements was absolutely incredible to observe. Leica's attacks, despite wielding such a heavy greatsword, flowed so smoothly and rapidly that the weapon handling seemed almost effortless and natural. As they watched the intense battle between the siblings, the crowd began murmuring extensively about Leica's precise control over her source power distribution, noting with admiration how her strikes were becoming progressively faster and stronger over time. They could only marvel at the exceptional power displayed by a true, legitimate daughter of the family head from one of the prestigious main branches. Some spectators even declared the fight's ultimate result was already obvious and predetermined. What they didn't know, however, was that Leica herself was growing increasingly frustrated and confused internally. She couldn't comprehend how Zeke kept successfully dodging every single one of her carefully executed attacks, or why it felt distinctly like he was simply toying with her condescendingly. Rangus, who was observing from a safe distance, couldn't help but feel amazed, his earlier acute worries fading rapidly as he witnessed Zeke's unnaturally calm and controlled movements. Zeke then remarked analytically that the martial arts technique Leica was employing were unlike anything he had personally encountered before. He admitted openly that her movements were demonstrably faster than those of any ordinary 1-star level fighter he'd observed. But Leica, growing irritated by his casual commentary, shouted for him to stop talking unnecessarily and focus properly on their serious fight. Zeke clenched his fist deliberately and stated he was already completely focused, and that was precisely why he could unleash such a devastatingly powerful strike so easily. His punch landed squarely on target, and Laika immediately gagged violently from the overwhelming force. She fell heavily to her knees, gripping both her sword and stomach in intense pain. The spectators gasped collectively and began whispering feverishly among themselves, wondering aloud how Zeke had managed to avoid all of Laika's sophisticated attacks, and questioning who this mysterious boy truly was beneath the surface. As Laika struggled determinedly to stand once more, she asked why absolutely none of her strikes could successfully land compared to fighting other one-star practitioners. She knew with certainty she was substantially faster than typical opponents, so logically Zeke shouldn't possess the capability to keep pace with her enhanced speed. Zeke admitted candidly that she was indeed faster than any one-star warrior he had ever personally witnessed in action. But in my experienced eyes, you're still fundamentally just a one-star practitioner, he explained. You're a one-star too, Laika snapped defensively, arguing that Zeke shouldn't possess the ability to match her refined speed and sophisticated movements. There's a straightforward reason for that disparity, Zeke replied calmly. Your breathing patterns, the subtle movement of your eyes, even the microscopic shift of your muscle groups, I can read them all accurately. By carefully observing these small physical details, I can reliably predict your next offensive move. It's entirely based on accumulated combat experience. Don't make me laugh with such arrogance, Laika shouted furiously, launching another blindingly fast strike directly toward him. But Zeke dodged easily again, reiterating that just like his analytical words a moment earlier, he could clearly see and read her every intended move with precision. In the next instant, he countered with another devastatingly powerful attack that sent Laika crashing violently into the stone wall with tremendous force. The spectators screamed in collective shock, asking frantically if Laika had really been decisively defeated. Master Zeke, that was absolutely amazing. You actually beat Master Laika, Rangus shouted in pure excitement. But Zeke stated calmly that it wasn't genuinely over yet. Their fight remained unfinished. As the settling dust cleared gradually, Laika stood defiantly once again, visibly bruised but completely unbowed in spirit. Zeke noted analytically that she had intelligently focused her source power into her core defensive area, allowing her to endure his devastating attack without suffering critically serious internal damage. He smiled slightly with genuine respect, and admitted that Laika was truly an extraordinary and talented fighter. That's enough, Master Laika, Rangus pleaded desperately for her safety, but Zeke instructed him firmly to move back immediately, warning that he could easily get caught in their intensifying next exchange. Zeke then detected an intense surge of concentrated aura flowing powerfully from Laika's body. He wondered with interest if she had just successfully advanced to the 2-star level mid-combat. The spectators noticed the dramatic transformation immediately as well. They couldn't be mistaken about what they were witnessing. The glowing, luminous mark manifesting on her body was definitive proof that she had indeed achieved 2-star status, with a distinctive white aura radiating outward. The 2-star level represented a critical developmental stage, where practitioners could actively channel source power directly into their martial arts techniques, even manifesting it externally, outside their physical body, as visible energy. Laika thanked Zeke earnestly, acknowledging that because of their intense confrontation, she had achieved the 2-star level significantly earlier than her training projections had anticipated. But because of that advancement, she declared with renewed confidence, you no longer have any realistic chance of winning this duel. With her aura blazing dramatically around her form, she charged toward Zeke with enhanced speed, her massive greatsword now surrounded by radiant, crackling power. Zeke only laughed with pure delight. He looked genuinely thrilled by this development. You've really improved dramatically, he said with obvious excitement, dodging another rapid enhanced strike. Your speed is absolutely incredible now with that power boost. But his expression suddenly shifted when he registered a sharp stinging sensation on his cheek. A shallow cut had appeared. I know I dodged that attack trajectory, Zeke thought to himself with surprise. Laika smirked confidently and asked if he could finally perceive the fundamental difference in their current strength levels. This is my true ability unleashed, she said with evident pride. Now that I've become a complete 2-star practitioner and gained my distinctive aura manifestation, I'll demonstrate the real devastating power of the authentic Thunder Greatsword technique. Oh, then I get to witness a martial art form I've never encountered before, Zeke said, smiling with mounting excitement. To him, this unexpected development was turning out to be the most thrilling and genuinely enjoyable combat moment of their entire encounter.